Hey guys, it's Dave, and it has been a minute since we talked about Hoya Matilda. 9 months, almost to the day, in fact. I'm going to double dip. When I first featured her, it needed a repot, but it had one flower and many peduncles, and I didn't want to disturb it. Well, that turned out to be a mistake because I could not keep up on the watering. It is currently in one of these little 4¼ inch pots. What I would have had to have done, I think in retrospect, is water it every day. So out of all of the bazillion peduncles, that's a rough figure, don't quote me on that, I got one more flower for the whole summer. And this is a summer bloomer. So my strategy did not pay off. Now, the plant has grown very well. If you're newer to the channel, I consider this an absolute gem in my collection. Not everybody loves small-leaved Hoya. I am not in that category of people. I absolutely adore this plant. I kind of covered it in 9 months ago in that video. But this is a pretty new Hoya. It was an accidental cross between Carnosa, the mother, and Serpens. And people say it's care-wise kind of in between difficulty. I find it very easy, and I said so. And I've had a lot of people comment that they have not found it as easy. So I'll tell you what I do. I don't generally recommend anybody do what I do in plants or in life. It works for me, but I don't know if you can duplicate it, but I'll tell you what I do. And it needs a repot into something that can hold more moisture. Right now it is in basalt, which, as you well know, I love. Ace Hardware in the United States is carrying some basalt in those marble clay pots I like, the whiter version. The difference being that the whiter version holds even more moisture than the basalt does, and the basalt holds more moisture than terracotta. Now, I had initially thought to use this thrifted terracotta pot. One, the pores get filled as they get older and get used. This is a very heavy pot, and it's shallow. So I don't need the depth of a pot. I want it to be wide because this is a plant that will put out more and more vines on its own. You're not going to have to work hard to make a Matilda a fuller plant. The problem with this pot is that I love it. I love the patina on it. I think it is just beautiful, and I don't want a trailing plant to cover it up. And trailing is how I prefer to grow Matilda. I don't think they look good trellised at my house. I've seen them look cute at your house, and good for us for each having our own taste and knowing what we like, but I think it's the perfect trailing plant. I think it's the perfect plant. I've already said it. I'll say it 3 or 4 more times. I love this plant so much. But I didn't want to use this pot. So what I did was I got out my ladder. I have a tall shelf on my plant porch, bunch of pots up top, and I found this one. So it is wide. I've got some orchiata bark in the bottom, so you can be sure that I've already determined I'm going to use this one. And it has one, it's not too tall, and it kind of narrows down without it being, an azalea shape like most flower pots. So I think it's an interesting looking pot. What I do when I'm trying to determine potting up a plant, upsizing a plant, is I take the new pot and I fill it with something that isn't messy. So maybe just pure bark, not huge chunky bark like Better Grow is so inconsistent, but like the orchiata. And then I pour it into the old pot and I see how many times it fills up. It's almost exactly twice the volume, this one. And that is the same for this one, even though they look quite different. So that I'm comfortable with. What I thought I was kind of stuck with before I started looking around was like a 6-inch, one of those taller pots, holds a lot of substrate. And these plants do not need a deep root system. They don't have a deep root system, I should say. So didn't really want to go that direction. While I put my mat down here, I'm going to note that I have always said that this was named after a friend's daughter, because I guess I read it off the internet. But I've also seen that it was named after a princess. Now, I tried to find a Belgian princess, which is where Emilio Beguine is from, the man who accidentally pollinated this. I can't find one. I can find a Princess Mathilde that was related to Napoleon. That seems unlikely. There's a Queen Mathilde, but she was a speech therapist before she became a queen. So I'm not sure, but I also haven't found any kind of definitive documentation on how they came up with this being named after a daughter's friend either. So who knows? Now, there is a sister plant to this, the Hoya Chuk, which I believe is in the big box stores now, as well as this one. And that one was named after Emilio's late wife. She had died only a couple of years earlier than that, unfortunately. I'll give you a little close-up on this plant before I go to work on it. So you can see it's freckled, and it's not real deep green. This is getting quite a lot more light than you'll probably give yours. It's in a south window under 3 Barina 10-watt lights, and it's about 10 inches from that. That's more light than anybody recommends. So there's another way that I grow this plant in a way you might not do. Keep in mind that when you see a plant listed as Hoya Mathilde Splash or Super Splash, this is all from the same seedling, your Hoya Mathilde. So they all have the ability to show various forms of that splash. Will I ever spend the money or care about the extra splash? No. I'm not going to be one. It's super variable. It's unstable. And I'm not someone who's just going to keep cutting back trying to preserve splash. No, thank you. I am far too busy for that, and I am not a very busy person. Okay, what was edited out is me fighting with this plant. It has been in here a long time. I just watered it yesterday thinking it would soften up a little bit. So let me go get a tool of the trade real quick. So I will just gently put the butter knife in. I get a lot of questions asking me about breaking roots against terracotta or, basalt or whatever. Really, I don't know if I just water my plants enough or not, but it's really not an issue, and it's also not something I would really worry about at all, as in I don't worry about it. And this is coming out now, and while I'm looking at it, I'm just going to pull out a yellow leaf from the middle. This canopy or this crest or whatever is so dense that occasionally I'll notice a yellow leaf, and that's nothing to worry about. It's not getting light, so the plant's going to let go of it. I always recommend, if you see a yellow leaf though, especially down at the base, take a look at it. Make sure it's not spider mites or some kind of a pest. I saw something I don't spend a lot of time on Facebook, at least in Hoyas anymore, and I saw something that just cracked me up the other day. Some guy said that by the time you see pest damage, the pests are usually long gone. Do what now? They what? God. By the time I have seen pest damage, let's take my New Guinea ghost for instance. It was infested with active spider mites and took the plant out. They were a long way from being gone. All right, I'm just gonna suspend this poor gal upside down while I look at any dehydrated leaves, things that can just kind of come off, not getting light. When you get a very old leaf and they get dehydrated, take your Lacanosa especially, when they get really wrinkled, there is no guarantee that those are going to rehydrate and look new again. Very often the plant is not going to expend resources on the old folks like me and rejuvenate them. They're just going to let them go kind of wrinkly like that. So it's not a big deal, but I'm here now. No pest issues at all here. There's no sign that this has ever had pests. And I probably should have mentioned, I got this plant as a little tiny cutting 2 springs ago now. And I have done not much to grow this beautiful plant. I did cut some single node props out of that, and I don't remember how many there were. They all survived. I potted it up, and that's the last time I ever thought about it. So it's done all of this beautiful growing on its own. There are some vines down here that are kind of died back at the end. There are peduncles that are getting fat and looking great, and there's some that just look dried up. I'll trim that off as soon as I repot it. There's what we have, a bunch of roots. It's already feeling quite dry, even though in anticipation of filming this, I gave it a very good watering yesterday. And when I water these, I water my Hoya, and it's already dry. So I'm not at all surprised that I couldn't provide enough water. I could have provided enough water. I'm not at all surprised that I didn't, though, if it's drinking it this quickly. So it is going to enjoy a pot upgrade. I was just having a conversation in comments with somebody. It's very common for somebody to switch Hoya to semi-hydro and be ecstatic about how much their Hoya loves pond, fill in the blank. I would take a slightly, why does this smell so good? I have no idea. It just smells like a really good plant. Side note there. I would argue that the plant could not care less what it's in as long as you're not suffocating the roots. It loves being hydrated. It loves having access to water. And I think the thing that would surprise a lot of people that are newer to the hobby is how much I water my plants, or how often I water them. How much is I drown the plant, but how often I do it. No taco test. This plant doesn't know what taco test is. It's never even heard of it. So yeah, don't get me started. Someone in the comments recently called me the worst kind of person for being unteachable, because I don't agree that the taco test is a tried and true method for growing Hoya. They had worse things to say, so they got themselves blocked, but it's not something that I practice, and I grow Hoya reasonably well. All right, armed with our pot, the orchiata bark in the bottom, I am forever off of Better Grow based on the amount of rot I got in one of my orchids in a relatively short amount of time. Not a short amount of time, but it shouldn't have been complete mud. And then I bought a couple more bags. I was getting pieces of pine that were this long and just all kinds of garbage in the bag. And if it's only going to last a year anyway, it's just not worth it to me. Just coming out of a rather ugly plastic bucket right now for my mix, but it is my usual mix. You know, the Cocoa Choir, number 3 perlite, and cocoa chip. A little bit of charcoal. They're like flakes. It's the Espoma brand, and it's like, you know, like if you've seen coconut shavings, it's the charcoal version of that. So I'm not real happy with it, but that's what I have to use. And, you know, want to keep the crown about where it was before. But this is going to look real nice. It's going to give it about 3/4 of an inch around the rim or so. I'm not great at estimating that stuff. And I think that'll be plenty of room for new growth to come up. I actually went to the dollar store the other day and I bought, it was a 2-pack of these scoops, which I don't usually use. But for this plant, I thought it might help me because it's going to be a little challenging to get around that crown. Maybe. We'll see here. I just want to make sure I'm not scooping just Cocoa Choir. I want to keep the mix roughly the same that it was. look out. Don't hurry, Dave. I'm always telling everybody not to hurry. Of course I do. I need to get my wife to work eventually here. I rarely film when she's home, but I have been waiting to feel good since I had to go take a trip for a medical appointment, and that hasn't been happening. And today I am kind of sparky, so I didn't want to waste it, because has it been 2 weeks since I posted a video last? It might be 2 weeks, kind of. I'm not very gentle. This is not a new plant. This is a very, very well established plant, so I am just going to, what Nick Pileggi used to call, get a little spank. I guess that's a karate chop, but there's your little spank. And I'm just gonna go in and make sure I'm pushing along the edges here gently, just to make sure I don't have any super gaping holes, because I will flood this material. It's chunky enough that it's not likely to collapse exactly, but I don't need any super big holes along the edge of the terracotta. That looks great. That is fantastic. So I'll clean up that mess later. So what I have found, pardon me for 1 second. All right, clean that up so I can put my elbow down. I shouldn't say what I have found. What I have seen online are a lot of people note watering this plant and then it immediately gets yellow leaves that fall off. That is almost certainly, almost 100% of the time, that is an indication that that plant did not need to be watered. The roots are still good. It's pulling that water up, but it has nowhere to put it, so it's killing off the old leaves. That said, I am not afraid to water this plant. I guess I already covered that. I'm not afraid to water any plant. I'm not a reckless madman over here just watering plants whenever, I'm in the mood to do it. But I think a lot of my success in houseplant care has been not being afraid to water. We've been so trained that everything needs to dry out and etc. and so forth. The taco test. Let me tell you why I don't like the taco test. And I'm not unteachable. It took me a long time to realize that's really stupid general advice. There, I said it. Stupid general advice. If it works for you, congratulations, you have found what works for you, which is the only important thing. For general advice, I did a video on an outer variegated latifolia where I gave up on the plant. I stopped watering it so the roots would die back because I knew I was going to compost it no matter what. And I presented a plant to you that looked pristine, and it was doing the taco test, no roots. So I'll link that video. I rarely do that, but if you want to see what a plant that did not have roots for a very long time can look like, look at that video. So it's a bad test because you could be stressing out a plant and have no idea what you're doing to the root system. And it's all about the root system. Sorry, I had to step off my soapbox there. So, as I said, this is being grown in quite bright light. I wouldn't mind bringing it back a little bit. I want to hang it somewhere. It's been sitting literally on one of these tea jars. Like this is a Lipton tea jar, so it's been sitting on it. I just put this in a lot taller pot, so I definitely don't want this like up against the Barina lights. It's a little lighter green than I love it. The success I can't argue with, though, is how well it has put on peduncles, and they are, getting fat and they're going to flower. So somewhere in between. I'm not going to put this in a really dark area where it's going to turn dark green but not flower. What I love about this plant for someone who's more on the beginner side is it's really full looking without you having to chop and prop like you might have to that latifolia, for instance. And while those will get new growth and vine out, to get a full plant, you're going to have to do some chopping and propping or buy a mature one. This one, not so much. But my favorite thing about this is it's almost as easy to grow as a carnosa, which is as easy as it gets. It will flower years before you get your carnosa too. On average, you can expect your carnosa, if you get it from cuttings or a very young plant, to take 5 years of great lighting to flower. Let's look at some of those new leaves and a peduncle there. How cute is that? This one flowered within, so if I had that at 9 months ago, that would have been, so that flowered within just a year from a cutting. Not a rooted cutting. No, a just rooted cutting is what it was. So hardly anything there at all. And of course I chopped and propped. Maybe I got 5 or 6 little props out of that I put in that basalt pot. So an easy plant to grow if you can kind of play with the watering. It's a pretty forgiving plant in terms of letting it go a bit dry. It will absolutely blast the buds if you let it go dry when it's trying to flower. It takes a lot of energy, one, to do flowers, but two, when you actually have a flower on here, they transpire a ton of moisture. So the leaves do a good job of holding on to moisture. Flowers do not. So that's one of those, as it starts flowering for you, just something to keep in your mind. One of those points that you are going to have to remember things change. And that includes, the real-time change in your plant from being vegetative state to a flowering state. That is a huge change for the plant. So you're going to have to adapt. Anyway, a short and sweet one on this honey, a wonderful plant. If you've been thinking about getting this, or a really splashy one if you've got your eye on one, why would you hesitate? It is so wonderful. It's beautiful. It trails like a dream. An absolute favorite of mine. I don't feel at all bad double dipping on this specific plant. Come join me again in the next one real soon, okay? Bye-bye.